So just a little bit of background about Cleveland Water Alliance, the organization that I work for. We are a nonprofit organization that's based here in Cleveland, but we work kind of across the Lake Erie region. And our focus is on new technology and innovation. So we look at how can new technologies help Lake Erie communities address their water resource challenges. Um, and so that's kind of the lens that you'll see we're applying to all of these different issues that we're talking about. Want to kind of insert a caveat here. Of course, technology and innovation is not the only way to look at water resource challenges or any of the environment and climate related challenges that y'all have been discussing today. But it is one important tool in the toolkit, if you will, to trying to address these challenges. And so we're going to be kind of for this talk and this exercise sort of focusing on how we can use new tech to impact particular issue areas. And so just to kind of give you a sense for how, we in the technology space might think about this sort of thing, I sort of visualize three key steps in, trying to use water innovation and new technology to address challenges. The first is identifying the problem. Obviously, you need to understand, whether it's a water quality challenge, it's water affordability, or other kinds of issues. You need to have a full picture of what the problem is in order to try and address it. And a big part of that is kind of gathering additional information, whether that's data gathered in the field, or kind of records that you can access, or interviews with people who are impacted. Gathering information from various sources is really essential to kind of developing a full concept of the problem. And once you've done that, you can use this information to take action and try and address the problem. So for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to give you a super pared down list of some of the tools in our toolkit when we're thinking about how we gather information about water quality challenges and also try and address them directly using technology. So here are a couple of the key tools that we use. Um, there's this thing called sensing. And when people think of sensing, they think often of like a little device that goes in the water or goes somewhere and gathers data in sort of real time, frequent updates, that sort of thing. But sensing is kind of broader than that. It's really any sort of tool that lets you measure the location or movement or concentration or amount of a water quality contaminant. And that could be lead, for example, or fecal matter in the water. There's a whole host, obviously, of different things that can impinge on water quality. But sensing is not just those, small sensors you could put in the water. Perhaps it's using a drone or a satellite to measure things from a remote sensing perspective. And it can even be what's called grab sampling, when folks go out and take a physical sample of the water and take it back to a lab and analyze it. Um, but obviously, sensing in whatever kind of form it takes is a really, really important component of how we gather information about a particular water challenge. Another really important source of information about water related challenges are analytics or models. And these are, instead of direct measurements of things that are going on in the environment, software tools that allow us to sort of interpret what we might know about what's going on in the environment. So this might use existing or new data to then predict what might happen or predict what's currently happening or guess what's currently happening in a space where we might not have real data to base our decision making off of. So these are two really kind of key components or tools in terms of how we understand what's going on and gather information about water resource challenges. Now I'll talk about two kind of key solution types or tools we use to try and resolve water quality challenges. The first one is something that you all are probably at least somewhat familiar with, treatment systems. These are processes that trap or eliminate the contaminants that we're worried about and improve water quality. So if you think about this, you probably think about like a drinking water treatment plant. You know, all of the water that comes into your home, into your school, into any public building that you're public or private building that you are in, most often that water will be treated by a plant somewhere that makes sure that the water is safe. But those treatment systems can look like a lot of different sorts of things, not just a drinking water plant. And we'll dive into that a little bit more as well. Another key kind of component that can help solve or address water quality challenges are control systems. So these are systems that instead of targeting the contaminant itself, change some sort of physical aspect of the system um, to allow it to be more easily managed. Again, you could think of this in the context of a drinking water treatment plant. If it's decided maybe that the water that's coming out of the plant isn't safe to drink, you could stop releasing that water out to the public. And that would be a kind of control step that you can take. Um, and before we move any further, I just thought I'd kind of try and relate these concepts to a system that might be more familiar to everyone, um, interacting with the weather. So, similar to water quality issues, we want to gather information about the weather and kind of know what's going on. And we also want to sort of change our behavior or the systems around us to make sure that we're comfortable in whatever weather system we might have. So with this sort of, allegory, I guess, or comparative system, our sensing would be something like, a thermometer. A thermometer allows us to measure the temperature at a given location. So it's a really good allegory for, what a water quality sensor out in the environment might do. It lets us know sort of what the levels of various contaminants are at a given location. Sensing could also look like in the weather system, though, like those overhead satellite cameras of hurricanes, right? You see those big maps on the Weather Channel where it says, "Here's the hurricane. Here's how it's moving right now." That's real data that's being gathered in the environment using a sensor that is a satellite. Um, so hopefully that kind of helps you understand, sensing is using different methods to gather real information that's going on right now. Then there's analytics and models. And this is something that we, access in the weather space very often, right? If you Google weather Cleveland, it'll show you the temperature it is right now and the weather it is right now, but it also tell you what it's going to be in an hour, in 3 hours, in 3 days, in 7 days. And that information that projects out isn't information that's confirmed, right? We know that often the weather will call for rain tomorrow and it doesn't always happen. That's because that information is based on models and analytics, looking at the situation that's happening now and using algorithms and software to sort of project out what may happen in the future. So I guess an important thing to think about when you think about models is their outputs aren't 100% reliable, and so often you have to sort of proof them against data that's gathered in the field. But they do let you understand the probabilities of what may happen in the future, something that you can't ever do. No matter how good a thermometer you have, it'll never tell you what temperature it's going to be tomorrow. Um, and so that's sort of one way to think about that. With treatment systems, this is directly intervening to change the system to look like what you want it to. And so for us, in thinking about weather, we could think about air conditioning or a heating system. You could look at the sensor that you have, the thermometer, and say, "Wow, it is too hot. I'm going to turn on my air conditioner," and kind of change that condition so that it's more the situation that I want to see. Um, Similarly with heating, obviously. You could also look at, the predicted behavior, the model that says tomorrow it's going to be hot. okay, well, I know maybe I should go buy an air conditioner because I don't have one right now. This is sort of a way to think about treatment systems. They're, physical systems that alter the quality. And then there's control systems, which are focused on more like changing the physical aspects. And the example I brought in here is like a levee. So if we know from a sensor, for example, that a hurricane is coming, from a, remote sensing from a satellite, we might want to build a levee higher, for example, change that physical system, to try and, prevent negative impacts from happening. So this is all to say that, these four kind of core tools, sensing, analytics and models, treatment systems, and control systems, are a lot of the ways that folks who are approaching water issues from a technology or innovation perspective look at applying to individual problems. Um, I like to pause just for a second because I know this is probably, a fair amount of new terminology as well as like maybe new concepts as well. So I'm wondering if folks have any questions on this content so far. The next step is going to be us starting to apply these on different case studies. So I'm going to be putting it to you to use them soon. So if you have questions you want clarified, feel free to speak up. Alrighty, I will go ahead and forge ahead. Um, so let's look at some examples of water challenges that we can look at trying to address with technology. The first example that we have is combined sewer overflow. Is this something that anybody's ever heard of before? Combined sewer overflow, or CSOs? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak if you have. Okay, no worries.
Hello.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Is this when you have different types of wastewater that are combined in the same system, like same pipe or something, and then during flood events or storms, it may overflow because, for example, the rainwater is going in the same pipes as your wastewater from like your home or something, and then you have so much water that is going there during a storm event that it's just flooding and overflowing.
Yes, yep, that's exactly right. So here's kind of a little diagram that details what you just described. Basically, in Cleveland, in Buffalo, in pretty much in Chicago, and pretty much every Great Lakes city, most East Coast cities, um, the storm and wastewater infrastructure. So the set of pipes that we have set up to deal with, storm, which is the water that falls out of the sky, runs into the drains that you see on the street. That's your storm water. And then your wastewater is water that you flush down the toilet. Um, both of those water sources come together in the same pipe. So that's why it's called a combined sewer system. Your storm water becomes sewage water because it just mixes in with all the poop water, and is equally, contaminated and needs to be treated in the same way. So this is an old way of setting up drinking water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, and it generally works pretty well as long as it's not raining too much. Because if it rains too much, then the volume of water in that combined sewer pipe becomes too much. And the system is actually designed to release that excess water that it can't handle directly out into the environment. So for us, that might be in the Cuyahoga River or into Lake Erie directly. Um, and this is actually a fairly common occurrence, particularly historically for cities like Cleveland. There have been significant improvements in Cleveland recently in dealing with this, but this is still one of, our main water quality challenges, is just getting, fecal matter, poop water directly into our water sources. So this is something that we obviously might want to address. So what I'm wondering from you guys is if you have any ideas on how, these kind of four core tools in our toolkit, sensing, analytics and models, treatment systems, or control systems, might be applied to trying to address this issue in some way. Where might we put a sensor to learn something about what's going on, learn something important to go on here, or that's going on here? What might we want to predict with analytics or with models? What might we want to treat in terms of improving the water quality? And where might changing the physical system with control systems might help address the problem? Anybody have any ideas? Oh, good. I found my attendee list. That means I can call on people if I want. Um, how about Kevin? Kevin, do you have any ideas how some of these technology tools might apply to this system? There's no wrong answers here. It's just a discussion, trying to encourage y'all to get engaged.
What do you mean how like technology?
So what I mean by that is like these different, types of approaches. Where might we put a sense, or where might we want to measure, water quality contaminant, for example, or project the behavior of the system, or what might we want to trap to improve the water quality, and how might we do that? That sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would say that
So,
there could be some things that you could use to measure, like where it says on the diagram, it shows the dam, it says outfall pipe to river. Maybe you could
mhm.
like measure the water outside to see if it's like contaminated or not. Or you could use like technology to like, I don't know, sound an alarm whenever something's contaminated in the water so you can go fix it.
Absolutely. That's a great example. So it's an example kind of how we would apply sensors to this use case, right? Or to this issue area. So measuring it often would be bacteria, because that's what we find in the water when poop water gets in there is bacteria from humans. Measuring that bacteria might let us know that we have a combined sewer overflow. That's a great example. Another thing we might want to measure, thinking about sensors, is the level of water in these pipes. As it starts to rain and we see the level of the water go up and up, we might think, oh, there's risk of potentially a combined sewer overflow. So that's a really great example. I'm wondering if any other folks have thoughts about how some of these concepts, the sensing, analytics and models, control systems, and treatment systems, might apply to this issue.
Hello again. I know in different countries they have systems where they actually separate the different types of water. So, for example, rainwater is like rainwater doesn't need the same type of treatment as wastewater from the toilet, for example. So they're actually dispersed in different types of pipes and are going to receive different treatments. And if there is an overflow, you could just release the rainwater in the body of water and just keep the water from the toilets, for example, in the pipes so that you make sure that this one will get treated before going out.
Absolutely. Yep, that's a great example, and that's something that happens in a lot of, particularly of smaller communities here in the United States. The process of separating this combined sewer, um, is one that's pretty expensive and time intensive. You have to dig up all these pipes and replace them. But if it's something that's feasible to do for a community, the benefits are huge because then you no longer have combined sewer overflows. um the from my perspective, thinking about approaching from what we would call like technology and innovation, that's typically viewed as more of a like an infrastructural approach because it's really big, it's really expensive. um but that is definitely a way that communities are approaching these challenges. So I guess let's see if one more person has any thoughts on this. Ways that we could try and address this challenge. How about Rusa?
Hi, it's Russa.
Russa.
I think just saying like relative and make sure that we're constantly like adapting to changes.
Yes, absolutely. The ability to adapt is really one of the main sort of things that technology enables us to do. Because if we can have a better idea of what's going on right now, what's going to happen in the future, and then also control our system well, we'll be able to more rapidly and dynamically adapt. So that's a great observation, Rasa. I'll just kind of walk through some of the ways that these different core technologies besides sensors are being applied right now in these spaces. So with analytics and models, we're able to, take the data from these sensors and sort of project it out and anticipate not only maybe here's where water is high now, but where water may become high in the near future, bringing in data from the weather channel or something like that that's projecting out, when rainfall may happen, will help us know more in advance when we might be at risk for combined sewer overflows. In terms of applying treatment systems, the real treatment system here is the normal wastewater treatment plant. So obviously sort of similar to, I think it was Thabat, my apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong, mentioned about separating the sewer systems. Another way to approach this is just expanding your wastewater treatment capacity so that you're never overwhelmed by the amount of water that's coming in. However, that's pretty expensive. And so one of the coolest things that we see right now is the ability to use what we call control systems to address this issue. And often what we find is that some areas of a city may be overwhelmed. Their combined sewers may be overwhelmed. There's a lot of water coming through and it needs to get dumped out. But other areas of the city might not be getting the same level of rain, or there might be more green space in that area of the city. So less of the water that's falling is going into the storm sewer. Some of it's entering the soil. And so with sensors, we could tell where that's happening, right? You could see, oh, well, the level is high, maybe over here in this part of the city, and it's low over in this part of the city. Well, let's then use control systems to sort of reroute the pipes so the water flows from the place where their pipes are overwhelmed to the place where there's still capacity in the pipes to use. And in that way, some cities have reduced the number of combined sewer overflows they have without having to, greatly increase their treatment capacity or physically separate their sewer systems. So hopefully that starts to help you understand how we think about some of these issues. I'm just going to go through a couple of other ones that are relevant to our area. And again, I want to challenge you all to think about how we might be applying these core technology concepts to addressing these challenges. So this is one that folks are probably pretty familiar with, generally speaking, lead in drinking water. Obviously, after the Flint crisis, this is one of the water quality issues that's really top of mind for a lot of people. And it does have some relevance to us here in Cleveland. This diagram kind of shows you, where most often you may find lead that leaches into water. Basically, lead is found in pipes, right? It's something that we used to actually make pipes out of. In like the Roman days, that was what pipes were made out of because it's very soft, easy to mold. And it's a component of many other alloys that pipes were made out of in the past. And when water sits in lead pipes for an extended period of time, that lead can kind of leach out into the water and become something that people can drink. And obviously that's a health hazard. So here it shows this is probably like an older home that tends to be where you might find lead. And there are a couple of different locations in the home that lead could exist. The primary component that we look at here in Cleveland is this lead service line, which is a line that connects the city's water to the home itself. This line here is what not frequently, but noticeably or substantially can be made of lead, especially in older homes. There's other issues like older fixtures, like faucets or shower heads, older pipes inside the home. Those can also leak lead, but it's really this lead service line that is kind of the primary driver, potential driver of lead pollution. This is what where a lot of the lead leached in the Flint case, for example. And so looking at this system, knowing that water coming in and sitting for a while in these pipes can leach out lead, I'm wondering if folks have ideas about how sensing, analytics and models, treatment systems, or control systems might apply to this issue area. Any thoughts on that folks want to bring? Pulling up my list again so I can call on folks, because this has to be participatory. Otherwise, it's no fun for anyone. How about Anis? Do you have any ideas how these might be applied? If I'm pronouncing your name right, apologies if I'm
Yeah,
not.
you did. Yeah, you did. So
Okay.
I was thinking maybe we can have some kind of testing kits to test the lead presence in the tap waters at homes, at every house.
Absolutely. Testing lead in the taps. This is something that Cleveland Water currently has available. If you're interested in testing your water for lead content, you can go to their website and send away for it. And this is really obviously the fundamental place to test. You want to know if the contaminant exists in the water that you're about to drink or cook with or something. So that's really good thinking, Anis. That's where we would want to apply sensors in this situation. Any other thoughts folks might have, maybe about the analytics and models, control systems, or treatment systems? How about Kevin? Any ideas here?
This one I'm not really sure.
No worries. All good. Russa, anything you want to contribute?
And Max, in the chat, it looks like Mrs. S environmental science students say filters.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I need to have the chat up as well. Thank you, Julianne. Yeah, filters. Great. And what would filters count as? That would be like a treatment system, right? A way to remove the contaminant from the system. And so there are a lot of different types of filtration systems that you can use. Very basic, like Brita filters, are actually effective at pulling out most lead. But there are also, much more intensive actual kind of like membrane-based treatment systems that can be used in the home as well. Let's get one more thought, maybe, if Russa has a thought to share.
I think just a big component, I think, is just educating people that there is ways to ensure that the water is safe, because I think a lot of people just want to buy water sometimes too, and just like they're always like, oh, it's because there's a lot of lead, but just showing that the water is safe, or there is ways to make the water safe to drink.
Absolutely. And you hit on something that's really key here. For folks here in Cleveland, the biggest challenge around lead in water is that people do not believe that lead can be taken out of water. After the Flint crisis, there's just a really big disconnect between residents and utilities in terms of understanding about this issue. And this is one of the things that has a really big kind of equity and justice implication here in Cleveland, because it tends to be those communities that have been historically failed by government that don't trust government to keep water safe. So it's our lower income communities and communities of color that will disproportionately be forced to pay their water bill and also go out and buy bottled water just because they don't have trust in the system. And it's a great example also of how, while technology can intervene and in some cases mitigate these challenges, it definitely isn't always the only solution. And communication and building connections between communities and utilities is a really key component here with the lead issue.
I have
I'll go ahead
a,
and talk. Oh yeah, please.
sorry, I have a
Yeah.
question about this. So you were saying that one of the main issue with the lead contamination is between the main line and your home.
Yes.
I was wondering if there was a map or something of like Cleveland or any city in the world where they would have like data collected from homes, and then they would say, okay, this house is contaminated, so maybe the neighboring ones are also, and they could predict using models and analytics where like they should intervene.
That is a great question and a great observation. That is something that is actually, my next bullet here, and like something that's just now being developed. One of the really big challenges with lead is that we don't know where it is. Like, we know, okay, it's in the connection lines, but we don't know which homes. We don't even know, in some cases, like which neighborhoods to look at. And so many cities have, like a lead connection replacement program that if you identify your connection is lead, they'll come and replace it. But they don't always know where to look. We know, oh, it's older areas of the city maybe that have had less housing restoration. But there is a company now that's using historical data from the city to plug into this artificial intelligence model that will predict sort of the likelihood that a given house, a given parcel, a given apartment building or what have you has a lead connection. And so that is one way that technology and innovation can help us sort of narrow the scope of the problem, help us understand, okay, instead of it being a problem that we don't know any house in Cleveland, we know 15% of the houses in Cleveland are the most at risk. So that's where we need to focus our efforts. That's a really great application of analytics and models to this issue.
And Max, there's a really great comment from, again, Mrs. S's environment science students. So talking about continuing testing at the medical level to identify problem areas and sources, and then change the infrastructure and update delivery, as well as educate residents on how this can be done.
Absolutely. And in some ways, that's kind of an interesting extension of this concept of sensors where, obviously this is not ideal, although there's a lot of things not ideal about having any sort of water quality challenges. You can kind of use the people who've been impacted. You can have sensing at that level, right? You can detect in students. There was a great study. There was a very strong study that was published I think last year or 2 years ago, that sort of documented folks that are experiencing lead contamination in Cleveland and sort of parceled it by geographic area because they were able to test blood lead levels in children. It's obviously really distressing to see that is an issue, but that is one of the ways that we can also sort of narrow the scope as well. It's worth mentioning that there are a lot of treatment solutions to lead in water, and that, just despite that study that I just referenced, lead in water in Cleveland is actually not as big of a direct human health concern as folks might think. There is a pretty simple treatment method that can be used at the drinking water utility level called water softening, which basically makes it so that the water that you drink is not very likely to leach any metals out of the pipes it's flowing through. It kind of coats the pipes in this film that makes it very difficult for the lead to leach out of. That in of itself is usually enough to dramatically mitigate lead exposure. And a fun fact, maybe not fun, an important fact to know about the Flint water crisis is that specific water softening treatment was taken out of practice right before the Flint water crisis. And it was kind of considered at the time by local managers too expensive. They switched over source to a harsher water source that was much more likely to leach water out of the pipes. And then the crisis happened. And so important to know here in Cleveland, not as big of a concern as in Flint, but still using a simple like filter as your treatment system. It's never a bad idea. One other thing that's worth mentioning here is that not all technologies apply to all situations. There isn't really a current method for controlling lead in water in a physical way beyond just pipe replacement. And so, not everything, again, can be solved with new tech and innovation. Some things are big infrastructural investments or investments in communications and connecting with communities. Any other questions or observations folks might have about the lead issue? I know this is particularly of interest to a lot of folks. For many people, this is the first thing that comes to mind when we think about water quality. The thing I should have mentioned, sorry, that study that I mentioned about lead disbursement across Cleveland identified that lead paint is actually a very significant human health risk in Cleveland and environmental justice issue in Cleveland. So, paint and built infrastructure is not my area, or housing is not my area of expertise. But if you live in Cleveland, there are very simple tests that you can do to test like the dust in your windowsill for lead content. And it's good to know whether there's risk there or not, particularly if you're in an older home. And that is, if you find yourself in conversations talking about lead poisoning in Cleveland, it's important to know that the primary risk factor for us is really the paint in our older homes, not necessarily as much our drinking water infrastructure. Everyone good? Any thoughts or questions before we move on? Just want to make sure I'm doing okay on time. Yeah, I think we can do maybe one or two more examples. Okay, cool. So the next example is harmful algal blooms or harmful algae blooms. Is this something that anyone's heard of? Can I get like a hand raise or just me? I've heard of it. If you've heard of harmful algal blooms. Have folks not heard of it? Is this like a totally new concept? Right, I need to look at the chat. Got one hand raised there. Coming
in.
A couple of yeses.
But someone hasn't heard of it. So.
Okay, good. That's great. I'm wondering if one of our yeses, maybe Anis, would like to talk a little bit about what you know about harmful algal blooms.
Okay, so harmful algal blooms are actually, I believe, coming from Toledo, from the mouth of Maumee River. And it's coming because of the eutrophication or the enrichment of the water by the use of fertilizers from the farms or from the homes. That is causing algae to grow enormously, and it's growing so much that the whole water has turned green, and it's leaving a harmful bacteria called microcystin or something, and then it's thick. It's so toxic that you can't even bathe or swim or do any kind of, even the dogs, when they're, I believe they died and suffocated. There are so many reports like that. So they are harmful, really harmful.
Absolutely. Very impressive. Yeah, that was a real end-to-end description there. So, the problem is driven by nutrient pollution, which if we have time, we'll talk a little more about. But basically for our region, it's primarily when farmers add fertilizers to their field that help their crops grow. And then it rains and some of those fertilizers get into the creeks and rivers that flow into Lake Erie. And it ends up the case ends up being that there's really high concentrations of these nutrients that are super good for making things grow in the open lake. And what it helps grow in the open lake is harmful algae, which is a bacteria that is toxic to people. So we're going to look at not necessarily the nutrient pollution side of things, but more the harmful algae side. So as Anise mentioned, this is something that happens near Toledo and like going all the way sometimes to like the Lake Erie Islands region. And we do have small occurrences of this in Cleveland as well. And basically this algae forms here on the lake, and it means that, you know, here on the beach, you don't want to go on the beach or in the water because that has potential health consequences. And, you know, if the algae can get into the drinking water intake where our drinking water treatment plants source water from, then it could become a human health risk entering the drinking water source. So I'm wondering if folks have ideas about how we might apply, again, sensors, models and analytics, treatment systems, and control systems to this problem of harmful algae. Anyone have thoughts? You guys know I love calling on people, so. All right, Russa, what do you think? What would you do if you were in charge of addressing this issue?
I don't know, to be honest. I actually work for Drink Local, Drink Tap, so we do a lot of discussions about algae blooms, and I think kind of across the board, no one really has a solution yet. It's hard because we want to like encourage farmers to keep farming and keeping industry, but also to kind of like get them into better practices so that so the runoff isn't going into our lake. But also it's but it's like, I think rapidly growing to where they didn't really expect that to happen either.
Yeah, no, that's a really fair point. And you know, often in the kind of water innovation space, and I'm really with any environmental issue, when you start thinking about how do we apply technology, it's not always a question of how do we fully solve this issue? Because as you said, this is a huge scope, a lot of stakeholders involved. It can also be how do we make sure that we reduce the impact of this issue, keep people as safe and healthy, protect ecology as much as we can, that sort of thing. I'm seeing we have chat here. Filter, says Anise. Yep, that's a good point. And sorry, how much time do we have left? Okay, we got a little time. I'm just going to talk through this one really quickly and then see if you guys have broader questions. One of the fundamental interventions that's been really transformative on Lake Erie is having some sensors at the drinking water intake. If we don't have sensors at the drinking water intake, we don't know if there's harmful algae and can accidentally not treat for it. And that did happen in Toledo in 2014. There was a period of 3 days where kind of the city of Toledo and the surrounding 3 counties didn't have access to public water because harmful algae got through the treatment train undetected. So now most, if not all, drinking water utilities, including Cleveland, have sensors that make sure we know if there's harmful algae present. Another component is analytics and models. There's a lot of work being invested in predicting the formation of harmful algae blooms, predicting how toxic they're going to be, and that sort of thing. There's the treatment system component, obviously, where the drinking water treatment plants have to treat for the toxin. And luckily, it is relatively easily treatable. As long as we know the toxin's there, we can always get rid of it to a safe degree. And so fortunately, with this issue, it's not necessary to filter it at the tap like you might want to do if lead were more of a concern. But it is something that still needs to be treated for. And then last, you know, thinking about control systems, how to change the physical system. This is where what Toledo did in 2014, instead of putting out toxic water to all of their citizens, they shut it off. They prevented access to that water. And while that's obviously, you know, a really last case kind of scenario, you don't want to have to do that. Making sure that people don't drink the toxic water is a good outcome in that case. So I know we're running now, we're pretty short on time. So I mostly just want to, you know, thank folks for kind of engaging in this exercise and also see if y'all have any questions for me about anything that we've talked about, but also more broadly about water resources in our region, or about careers in this space, or anything else y'all want to talk about. Y'all feel like you know everything there is to know about water now? I mean, this was pretty comprehensive. You basically learned everything. Okay. Well, I want to share my email with all of you. So if at any point I can support you in school projects, or as you start to look towards next steps like finding jobs or going to college or anything like that. Um, if there's anything I can ever do to support you in your efforts, or answer further questions that you might have, please feel free to reach out to me. I always love engaging with high school students, particularly. I think y'all bring just really interesting perspectives. And I was really impressed with all the knowledge y'all brought to this conversation today. So thanks again for tuning into my session. I know you had a lot of choices.